Grad text that we have, which is the standard text used by biblical scholars today, by translators I mean. But there are other texts that were in the Genesis that were quite different. For example, Jeremiah has a much shorter, or is it, no, I think it's a much, I would need to check this, but it's not the same book. The content says different chapters, additional or less, I forget which, than the one we have today. And also there are big discrepancies between them, according to Professor Bart Ehrman, who is an expert on the biblical text.
Yeah, so I guess my query was to the percentage, because I said 99%.
I don't know the percentage, but I get the impression from Bart Ehrman that it's much lower than that. And there's a popular myth that somehow the Dead Sea Scrolls confirmed the Torah we have. Indeed, he's quite clear that that's not the case. It is in some books, but not in others, and they're radically different ones. But also, to use your expression, it's a moot point, because the New Testament writers didn't use that anyway. They didn't quote from it. They quoted from an entirely different book called the Septuagint, which is an often extremely faulty translation of the Greek, of the Hebrew Bible. And esteemed scholars like James Barr from Oxford, who's a professor of the Hebrew Bible, have said that in many passages the Torah has been woefully mistranslated. It's a very poor translation. But that very wording has been used by the biblical writers, quoted, even though it's a very bad... So this would be an example of corruption, I would argue. The Quran doesn't say this openly or explicitly. I'm saying this. If you want to see how the Bible has been mistranslated and corrupted, look at the Septuagint and compare passages from that, which is used by the New Testament, that's its Bible, with the Hebrew Masoretic text. But there are other versions. There are many. There's the Samaritan Pentateuch, there's a Masoretic text, the Dead Sea Scrolls, which you mentioned, and there are other canons, and they don't all agree. There is no single Torah that we know existed. And so when we talk about the Torah today, it is a scholarly reconstruction. We don't actually have a fixed, clear, homogeneous, unified text that we've always agreed is the Torah. It's a scholarly reconstruction. So scholars typically will look at the Masoretic, they'll look at the Septuagint, they'll look at the Dead Sea Scrolls, they'll look at other... If you look at the NRSV, at the critical apparatus at the bottom, it often tells you where this translation or that translation, it comes from completely different manuscripts. And often, credibly, we have no idea what the words mean anyway. Often they'll say, meaning uncertain, meaning uncertain. We don't even know what the words mean. So when we talk about the Torah, it's a really, when you dig deeper, it's a really complicated subject. There is no single Torah. And just to reiterate finally, the biblical Torah used by the New Testament is often an extremely poor and inaccurate translation of the Hebrew, whichever Hebrew is used, and it wasn't the Dead Sea Scrolls, it was going to be something else. And it results in faulty quotes. So you have many of the quotes in the New Testament are erroneous and faulty, and there's a brilliant one in Hebrews I can mention, which is used to prove a point of doctrine, even though the original Masoretic doesn't say that. And so it's a very uneven and a difficult thing to really talk about. So, I'm not surprised the Quran talks like this.
Yeah, well, you said a lot of points, and I listened.
Please go.
So essentially, because when I was looking, well, basically,
he's a heavyweight too.
So I looked and it said, for example, comparative study reveal word for word identity in 95% of the text, and that would be more against the Masoretic.
Oh, 95. Well, you said 99.
Right, and then I said 90. So let's just go for 95. But
okay.
You know,
so who is saying this?
I've just Googled, so I've just...
Yeah, but who is saying this? You can't just Google it. Google is not a biblical scholar.
Yeah, because I just don't want to sort of...
Well, can we stick with Bart Ehrman? Bart Ehrman is a recognized world authority on biblical manuscripts. Shall we Google Bart Ehrman and the Masoretic text and see what he has to say? Well, he's very clear that...
Well, there's many other scholars, so he's...
No, but I'm citing a scholar. You cited right. Google.
Okay.
You could, Professor Google.
Yeah, I can give you...
So...
let me find the quote.
Sorry, I couldn't hear you, Paperboy. Right, speak up a little bit.
Yep. Okay, let me see. So what I'm trying to do is find out the accuracy.
Do you agree with that characterization of Bart Ehrman's views on the
I've not heard it, so I can't.
Yeah, well, should we Google that now? Let's be clear what Bart Ehrman is saying on this issue. Then also, I think the more important issue here is the way that the New Testament quotes the Torah. It doesn't quote the original Torah. No one should dispute this. He quotes from a Greek translation. And the Greek translation, as scholars have been well aware, although most Christians are not aware of this, is occasionally really poor and mangles or misrepresents or even mistranslates the original. And this is not a point that Bart Ehrman alone makes. It's well known amongst Old Testament scholars. So if we're looking for corruption, I think it's the elephant in the room. It's not like what percentage of the Dead Sea Scrolls is faithfully transmitted to our translation. The New Testament itself quotes from a Greek translation, which is often very poor, and it mistranslates, mangles, or even deliberately distorts, I would argue. I can think of one example in Hebrews, which is an egregious example. I'll mention it to you, okay? It's a quote from the Psalms. This is Hebrews chapter 11, where the author of Hebrews 11 quotes a psalm to prove a point of Christian doctrine, which says in the psalm, and I'm paraphrasing here because of the top of my head, that God gave his son a body. It's the incarnation to inhabit, that God gave his son a body. So it's talking about the incarnation in Hebrews. When you look at the original in Hebrew, it says nothing about that at all. It talks about a completely different subject. The point is this, and this is a standard observation, that the New Testament writers have used a distorted mistranslation to create Christian doctrine about the incarnation of Jesus. I mean, this is so central to Christian faith. It is based on a false mistranslation. So I would offer you that specific example for us to discuss now, because we can really hone in the detail of this and look how the New Testament has corrupted and mistranslated even the Torah they had at the time. So that's my challenge to you.
I'm starting off with because my question initially was about the Torah, not the New Testament.
No, it's the New Testament quoting the Torah is what I'm talking about.
But my initial point wasn't related to the New
which
Testament.
Torah? There's a Septuagint, the Masoretic, the Dead Sea Scrolls.
Right.
There are lots of Torahs.
Yeah, so
it's complicated.
Yeah.
Your question didn't suggest complexity, but rather kind of a simplistic understanding.
That my statement was when we have the Dead Sea Scrolls, and I have to find a percentage quote because it'll take too much.
I'm still waiting for it.
Yeah, it will take too long.
Well, I can wait.
Yeah, but
I'll wait.
Have a discussion.
I'll wait for your quote because you've made an assertion which you've not been able to back up.
Maybe just as a parenthetical.
So I said essentially 90-95% it matches up with the Masoretic text.
I don't know any scholar who says that. It's very different because
I've seen
quotes along those
claims
lines
like that. Yeah.
claims, yes, but I'm saying that scholars haven't said this.
I haven't delved into who was making the claims specifically, but
it's a common claim. You're absolutely right, but it's fake news. It's not true.
The Dead Sea Scrolls are viewed very differently by Jews in relation to the texts that they have versus how the Dead Sea Scrolls. Not to be
it'll take too long because there's too many links. So
Anyway,
I'll be here too long because I've been looking already.
No, Mike, we came back to what you asked me about the Quran teaches about corruption about the Torah. I'm saying that one example, they're not given by the Quran, which meets the Quran's allegation, is the well-known example in Hebrews chapter 11 where the Bible misquotes the Quran to prove points of Christian doctrine. Yeah. It's a really serious point, this. And I think that's a good example. They're not detailed by the Quran, of what the Quran is talking about nonetheless. And I'm offering this to you, something we can talk about now on camera to discuss what the New Testament has done to the Bible, the Old Testament, because it often misquotes it. And there are many examples. And Paul, for example, if you check Paul's quotes, this is the Apostle Paul in his letters, with the Hebrew Bible, in a good English translation, like the NRSV, what is striking about it, to me, is how often he misquotes it. He doesn't actually have, he leaves out phrases, or he gives a completely different meaning to it, or he lops off a crucial clause at the end. This is quite typical of Paul.
Yeah, but so this
is what the Quran's talking about.
But my initial question, because I was more concerned with the corruption of the Torah.
Yeah, so that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah,
the corruption of the Torah in Christian writings.
Yeah, but I'm not at the moment concerned about whether Paul misquoted something or not. So
this is your New Testament.
Yeah, but that's what I'm saying. I wanted to know about the corruption of the Torah, not whether Paul misquoted
No,
something.
the question is, did the Jews corrupt the Torah?
Yes.
Paul was a Jew. Okay, you agree with that, don't you?
Yes.
So we have an example here of an actual known historical Jew corrupting the Torah, and we have evidence in your hand now in the New Testament. And I can prove it to you if you'd just like to check. We can do this experiment now.
So what is your...
So I've given you an example of Jews actually corrupting the Torah, and you say, I'm not talking about that.
Paul was misquoting.
Yes. It's easy to demonstrate.
Right. So that's, again, but if he's misquoting, I'm talking about textual corruption.
So am I. So am I. There is textual corruption.
If misquoting
He's changing the text.
No, misquoting, to be specific, what I'm saying is Muslims claim there was an original Torah.
Yes.
And at some point this got lost in history.
Well, that's not what I said. No, that's not true.
No, but
that's not true. That's not what I said.
I'm not saying that's what
I never said it got lost in history.
I never said you said that.
No, you said Muslims say that.
That's general claim.
No, they don't.
Because, okay.
Let's talk about what the Quran says, not about Muslims say. Okay. What does the Quran say? And I've given you four senses that the Quran talks about corruption.
Okay, the first question would be, was there an original Torah?
We all agree on that. So then, Moses existed, he received the Torah from God.
So then the next question was, there was textual corruption at some point.
Right. I'll briefly go through the four senses that as a non-scholar, I could be wrong, so I'm welcome Nazam to correct me if I get it wrong. The four senses that I understand the Quran is talking about this. One is the Jews orally corrupted it, tarif as it's called. And this, Paul, his own actions certainly come within this definition, where they verbally misquote or obscure or put their hands over passages. We know this from the narrations of the time that they did this. Yeah.
Yes.
Another sense is actual textual corruption. You're absolutely right. Tarif and Nast is also included in that.
My question was then, when did that part?
At the time of the Babylonian exile, were the Jews in Judea, were they in possession? The remaining Jews, were they in possession of a scroll?
Can I just finish up this?
Sure.
Because there were four. The third one is, according to the Quran, an allegation made against the Christians as well, is that they have forgotten a good part of what they were taught to remember and to teach. So there's been a forgetting of the revelation as well, which is another form of corruption in my view, because you no longer have the complete version of the revelation. If people have just discarded it, forgotten it, it's no longer part of our collective memory. That's also a really important part of what I would call, you may disagree, I call that corruption. We no longer have the original text. That matters a great deal. The Quran claims repeatedly to be a muhaymin, like a quality control over the text that Jews and Christians do have, and to have guardianship over it. So it can tell you where these texts say the Bible teaches something. We know that it's true if it conforms to what the Quran says. If it contradicts what the Quran says as the final pristine, uncorrupted, unlost revelation, then we know what the Bible says is a corruption. This is the fourth way, okay, that we can tell when it's false or corrupted when it disagrees with what the Quran explicitly teaches. So, for example, the Quran says, in my understanding, you correct me if I'm wrong, that Jesus was not crucified, although it appeared to them, the Jews, that he was.
And what does Ba'al say about that? Because you appealed to him earlier on as he's a sort of authority. What's his opinion on the crucifixion?
As a secular atheist historian who does not believe in revelation, he thinks that Jesus was crucified, yes.
Right.
Absolutely.
Okay. So do you accept that?
No.
So why should I accept?
Because I'm using my own critical judgment here. I don't slavishly follow scholars when I agree with them, or when they don't agree with them.
To make an objection to me.
Do you know, because
as if he was
my answer to that is, and it's not an answer he would accept, my answer to that is, God knows better than Bar Ehrman.
Okay,
God knows better than Bar Ehrman.
Bar Ehrman as an authority? That's my whole
Because on the specific question of manuscripts, he's a textual critic. That's his expertise. He was on the NRSV committee. He worked there with, Bruce Metzger, who was one of the most greatest textual scholars. God trumps Bar Ehrman every time.
Okay.
Bar Ehrman may be the most brilliant human being who's ever lived, but he's second to God.
Okay.
God knows better than Bar Ehrman. Do you know why? Because God is timeless and has a perfect apprehension of everything that's happened in the universe. Bar Ehrman is a fallible human being. And he has said, by the way, let me quote Bar Ehrman to you on this subject. He says, all these historical judgments are probabilities. We cannot know with certainty. They're probabilities. And he's right. They are probabilities, they're historical reconstructions. So he doesn't know for certain. God knows for certain because God knows everything. He's omniscient. That's my reply.
Just interject. Because I asked you this, I'm just going to ask you what I asked you. do you believe?
Do you want to just
do you believe at the time of your prophet that Jews were corrupting the Torah either verbally or both verbally and
My
textually?
understanding is both.
Both. Okay. And the reason why, and you hear the question I would have asked you, but you had a different opinion, was it's essentially because we do have, for example, the Dead Sea Scrolls and like textual.
But the Dead Sea Scrolls are not the same as our modern Bibles in many important ways.
So when we get,
Look at Jeremiah, for example.
Yeah, but when we get to establish, for example, what the proximity would be, my question would be, do we find those alleged changes of the Jews in any of the texts because we have some stability, even if it was...
We don't have stability.
So yes, we do.
No.
Because in terms of the
I told you why.
Masoretic text was one of the greatest finds because it highlights the stability of the Torah, which...
No, it doesn't.
Yes, it does.
Well, let me
that's why it was that's why it's such
absolutely,
a significant
absolutely
find.
it doesn't. Which Torah are we talking about? Why do you privilege the
Yeah, but I'm
Masoretic
saying-
over the Pentateuch, over the Dead Sea Scrolls? There are
saying-
many, and there are also
But
many
this is
scholars,
my-
but there are additional Torahs we've lost.
My question is essentially the same. Because if a Muslim believes that Jews were textually corrupting the Torah at the time, do we find those textual corruptions in any of the manuscripts that we have?
No, well, that's
because we should find, like, from the 6th century, 7th century.
You see, it depends what you mean by textual corruption. I've given you examples where we give an example of Paul corrupting the Torah, by the way, which is a really important issue because he actually literally distorted and changed the words, which is what the Quran accused the Jews of. But it actually says that in the Quran.
Again, I've said my argument is textual corruption. So Paul is saying
it's textual
gone to the Sanhedrin, open up the Torah and change the text. No, he didn't do that.
Yes, he did.
No, he didn't.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Shall we look at examples? We'll go through the examples. The one I repeatedly given you,
because what he's saying is Paul would write.
Can I give you an example? The example I've given, which I really would love to go into detail.
Yeah, but you're saying Paul would write his letters and misquote the.
No.
That's different.
I said when you multiple times when he quotes the Old Testament, you must have done this.
Where's he
you
quoting
must have
the
done
Old
this.
Testament?
I challenge anyone here.
In his letters?
If you look up Paul's quotes from the Old Testament,
In what book?
hang on a second. In Paul's letters, when he quotes in the Old Testament,
that's not the Torah.
Will you let me finish? When he quotes in the Old Testament, the Torah, repeatedly he misquotes it. He changes the words. That is corruption of the text.
Forgives is different from faith.
Do you not think? Well, the one example I gave, another one from was Hebrews chapter 11.
But do you believe that Paul corrupted the Bible?
If it's like Paul. No.
Well, but this is more interesting because you know the example.
The other one is Romans 11.
But Nazim, who's a walking, can we look at the text that Paul misquoted and compare? Yeah, we will then. Let's look at an example and we'll demonstrate how Christians have distorted Jews in the name of Paul, who was the most famous Jew of the first century after Jesus, how he actually physically distorted and changed the Torah that he had with him.
What was his purpose of changing the Torah? Or what was
I can't look at his psychological motivation.
No. When I say that, I mean the text that you're referring to. What was the change?
Let's look at the change. We're going to look at examples now.
Isn't the
Nazim.
point making more to
Which
do
one do
with
you want? Or do you want
Well, you pick one.
evidence of profit?
You mentioned Romans.
Yes. Yeah. We've sort of diverted.
We're going to look at examples.
Because
We're going to demonstrate how a Jew actually distorted the
you
scriptures.
diverted from my original point, and
Right.
But I want to hear what he says. But we'll go back.
In Romans chapter 11, verse 26, Paul allegedly quotes from Isaiah 59:20. He says in the Romans passage, this is Paul's letter to the Romans, the deliverer will come out of Zion. He will turn away godlessness from Jacob. And this is my covenant with them when I take away their sins. And this is to do with the gospel, as Paul claims. When you look up Isaiah 59:20, it says the opposite. He has completely twisted the meaning.
But again, that's irrelevant of my
No,
point.
it
because
is
I
relevant. It's a
asked for
Jew quoting.
It's
what the Quran says.
Textual corruption of the Torah.
Yes, this is textual corruption
I'm
of the Torah.
saying the actual. This is Paul's letter. So if he's misquoting or
Deliberately,
twisting it, I'm not even making that argument because that's my argument. is
Why
that-
did Paul misquote it so badly? Why do you think?
If he was misquoting,
Why?
he's misquoting. My point was.
But why is?
when
But
was
you
the
believe
Torah-
this guy's inspired possible of God, don't you?
Yeah, but my question was, when was the actual Torah corrupted? Because you agreed there was an original Torah.
I'm saying there are multiple corruptions and additions throughout history.
Right.
I've told you about the Dead Sea Scrolls.
Let me ask you a question. What Paul's quotation, do we find it in the Torah?
Yeah.
So the Torah, if I go to the Old Testament now, do I find
Yes, he's misquoted it.
No, I'm saying exactly.
Well, there's a sense, there's a
saying.
narrow Torah, which is the Pentateuch, a
So
broader definition of Torah,
if
which is the whole Old
Paul's
Testament.
quote is not in the Torah, that means Paul hasn't corrupted the Torah.
No, he's misquoted.
Right,
He's misquoted.
That's not what my point was.
No, my point is, our point is that that's what the Quran is saying.
If the Old Testament,
I understand what you're saying, a narrow Torah and a wider...
Yeah, the narrow is the first 5 books,
they're trying to muddy.
and it has a hang on, to interrupt.
Like can also refer to Old Testament.
So the term is used in different senses.
But the point they're making is a non-argument, because if you could go to the
claiming
Torah,
that it would matter if he went back and changed.
that's straw man in my point.
He did.
Yeah, exactly. If the change was in Isaiah, then he's got a point. But my point is that because you can see the difference, they haven't.
Oh, I see. No, in that sense, you're right. But what I'm saying is, here we see an attempt to actually change the scriptures, which is exactly what the Quran accuses the people of the book of doing. We actually see an example of this in history. Now, there are other examples where we can't date it precisely, but we know because we have multiple Torahs that don't all match. The Samaritan Pentateuch is not the same as the Septuagint, it's not the same as the Masoretic text, and according to scholars, there are other Torahs versions which may be used, for example, by other writers, which we no longer have. So we don't have the Torah, just like the Quran says, that was originally given to Moses. We have different kinds of edited, corrupted, changed, forgotten parts of the Torah.
And this is where my argument comes in, and I can go to the Quran where it says the prophets were the protectors of the Torah.
Yeah, we know this.
So therefore,
Also that says that the rabbis
and the
priests maybe or something.
Yes.
Let me bring it up, because if you go to the tafsir, it also expands on that. It includes the prophets.
Did you look up the Isaiah? Oh, you did, yeah.
So therefore, because my point would then come to
And if I can, I just want to look at another.
corrupt Torah, because if we have, for example, some Dead Sea Scrolls and we can see the consistency in the text, because it's not wildly different.
The Quran says God would teach him the Torah, so that implies that Jesus learned the Torah not from the rabbis, so to speak, but he learned it from God.
So
That implies it was corrupt, so God taught him.
say that again.
That implies that the Torah was corrupt in his
repeat
time.
that again.
Because the Quran says in chapter 3, God would teach him the Torah, so that implies that the Torah must have been corrupt.
So did Jesus teach the people that the Torah was corrupt?
Well, for example, when he cites the passage from 1 Samuel, he says Abiathar was king.
No, but I'm saying according to the
So
Bible.
that implies that Jesus is quoting a different Torah from what 1 Samuel 15.
Yeah, but then if you're saying Jesus,
Abiathar wasn't
but so you're
high priest
conflicting
at the
two
time.
different things, because you just said that Allah taught him the Torah. So then if Jesus is misquoting the Torah, how could Allah have taught him the Torah? You can't use two different.
It's not misquoting. But how do you know Jesus
Because
misquotes the
he
Torah?
said
How do you know he
Allah
misquotes
taught
it?
him, gave him Jesus the Torah, so therefore it would be accurate.
Yes.
But then if you're going to the Bible and saying that Jesus misquoted, then
So the gospel writers are not eyewitnesses of Jesus' ministry anyway.
because I'm using your.
Jesus disagrees.
Yeah, but
The Jesus of the Gospels disagrees with the Torah that we have present.
Yeah, but I'm more
He's quoting
referring.
a different version of that. You know when he says
I'm a
Abiathar was high priest at the time
Yes.
when David.
Oh yeah.
But if you look at the Torah, it doesn't actually say that. It says someone else.
So who's getting it wrong here? The Torah or Jesus?
I'm appealing to the Quran.
Yeah.
So that's why I'm asking these questions.
Can I share to you an example
So
where
can I just bring my
Okay,
point? Because I think you lost my point. My point was, and if you want me to bring up the references, I can. My point was the Quran says that the prophets were the protectors of, including the rabbis.
It doesn't say that.
Where does it say
In
that?
the Tafsir, you said in the commentary.
Can you
Well,
quote
the meaning of it?
Can you quote from the Quran itself and not your memory of what it might have said?
Do you want me to get? Come on.
Well, that's what I just asked you to do. And while you're doing that, I'm going to share with you the actual quote from what is traditionally seen as a letter of Paul, Hebrews chapter 10, not 11. I got the chapter wrong, but the example is there. For according to the author, for this reason, when he came into the world, he said, this is Jesus, sacrifice and offering you did not desire, but a body you had prepared for me. Right? So according to, and this is a quote from the Psalm 40, verse 6 to 8. But this is a quote from the Greek translation, all right? So this is the incarnation of Jesus. A body you prepared for Jesus. The Son had a body prepared for him. Now, as this Bible, this is a Christian Bible, by the way, produced in the United States, as this Bible itself admits This is cited according to the Septuagint, yeah. But if you look at the original reference in Psalm 40, can you see where it is there?
Psalms 40, verse 6 to 8, according to the Septuagint.
There we are.
So, yeah.
There we go. The original says, the Masoretic text, yeah, the Hebrew says, instead of saying, a body you prepare for me, it has ears you have dug for me. Ears that you have dug for me. That's what the original Hebrew says, but this Christian writer has twisted the meaning. And if you look at James Barr, his professor of Hebrew at Oxford, he discusses this passage as one of the world's experts. And he says, in his view, that the translator has made a mistake. And as he's an expert in the Hebrew and the Greek, he can see where the author has made an error in the translation. But the point is that this passage, which supports the incarnation of Jesus, is fake. It's not real. It's this translation.
So let me just.
Thanks.
No, because I've got to go back to my original point.
I'm asking you a question now. How do you respond to that?
We're jumping because I said I'll.
Can you answer that point?
I won't, and I'll tell you why.
You won't?
I'll tell you why.
But you see, we're answering your questions.
Yeah, I'll tell you
Can
why.
we have a bit of to and fro here?
I'll tell you why.
Can you for once answer one of our questions?
I will tell you why.
Can you answer one of our questions? Why won't you respond?
Yeah, let me speak.
Well, respond then to
Can I
that.
speak?
Yes.
Okay, I'm telling you why I won't respond first, because you asked
won't
me
respond.
to read the verse. So I'm going to read the verse first that you asked me to find.
Okay, fair enough.
Okay.
And then you'll respond to that, yes?
I missed it because I was looking for the verse.
Well, I'll repeat it. Okay, well, I had to repeat it to you.
I had a question because
Well,
you see,
I'm in the middle of a
because now,
discussion,
let me
sorry.
read the verse that he asked me to read.
And then you'll
It
just
says,
address this one.
Indeed, we sent down the Torah, in which was a guidance and light. The prophets who submitted to Allah judged by it for the Jews, and as did the rabbis and scholars by that which they were entrusted of the scripture. So here again, I'll just read it again. Indeed, we sent down the Torah, in which was a guidance and light. The prophets who submitted to Allah judged by it for the Jews, as did the rabbis and scholars by that which they were entrusted of the scripture of Allah. And this is from Sahih International.
So it doesn't say the prophets were given that task. That's not how I read it. That's not what you claimed it said at all.
So the prophet, if I said I'll go into the tafsir as well.
No, I want you to look at the...
Right.
What you've just said, that says, is not what you
let's start
claim.
with the exegesis of the text. Indeed, we sent down the Torah, in which was a guidance and light. The prophets who submitted to Allah judged by it for the Jews. So
No, I don't understand that English. Can we have another translation? Have you got another one, please?
Yeah.
No, I don't. The English is very poor. The translation is not very good.
I'll give you pick.
No, don't give me Pickthall. That's a Victorian